From the Detroit Policy Conference at the Motor City Soundboard, hello and welcome to your Daily Detroit. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jer Stays. This is your show for Wednesday, January 29th, 2020. If you've been following us today on Twitter, you know we've been doing a bunch of interviews with lots of interesting people. We will be trickling those out in upcoming episodes.
So much twittering, so much trickling.
So much Twitter. So much. That tweet bird, man, you have just been like squeaking the tweet bird all day.
Don't forget the trickling.
On today's show, we'll discuss some of our takeaways from the conference and run down some news about fixing the damn roads ahead of Governor Whitmer's State of the State address Wednesday night.
And later, I catch up with cannabis entrepreneur Anqunette Sarfoh. She's a former Fox 2 news anchor who now serves on the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association. She's also planning to launch a growing, processing, and retail facility up in Macomb County.
That's all coming up after I let you know that Daily Detroit is brought to you, in part, by the generosity of our members. Independent media like us requires new models of support. If you like what we're doing, you can help keep this project strong by going to patreon.com/dailydetroit.
For as little as just $1 a month or whatever you want to give, you can help ensure our ability to seek out new and distinctive voices and stories that move Detroit's conversation forward. And thank you.
In the ongoing road funding saga, the Michigan Senate voted on Tuesday to require a study to examine the feasibility of bringing toll roads to the state. The bill is now with the State House. The measure requires that the Michigan Department of Transportation hire an outside firm to conduct a study that would be done within the next 18 months. Tolls are one of many options legislators are starting to look at, considering the lack of public interest in Governor Gretchen Whitmer's proposal last year to increase the gas tax. It's expected that the governor will unveil some sort of plan, probably involving borrowing money, to help fund fixing the roads at Wednesday night's State of the State address. We plan to talk about it on the show tomorrow.
And Jared, I would just add, one of the people we interviewed today that listeners will be hearing from soon, Brad Williams, the Detroit Regional Chamber's chief lobbyist up in Lansing, spoke to him about the poll results, which I know you covered earlier this week, that showed that something 53%, if I'm not mistaken, of respondents think the state has enough money already to fix the roads.
Yeah, we had a really interesting conversation, and I'm hoping to get that one out this week. I think it's really relevant about that and, getting in depth on a few of the other issues that they covered.
Yeah, absolutely. But road funding, we have got to get serious about it. I mean, I know the governor is going to be feeling the urgency because obviously fix the damn roads was her main campaign slogan, and, her 45-cent gas tax hike proposal went nowhere last year in the legislature.
All right, since we're at the Detroit Policy Conference, Sven and I wanted to run down a few of the interesting things we saw. First off, I wanted to note about Doug Song. He is the founder of Duo
Security.
Yep, Duo Security. That's one of Michigan's, and that was one of Michigan's few unicorn companies, meaning that it was worth more than $1 billion. And his talk was really interesting about regional cooperation, pushing very hard for that. He really thinks that Ann Arbor is part of Metro Detroit, which I think is pretty interesting. I'd love to get your thoughts in a second, as you're from the Ann Arbor area. And his disappointment in the regional transit millage failing. He says that these are the kinds of basics that regions should just do. And I'd note, Sven, on that point about Ann Arbor being a part of Metro Detroit, we did a poll up on Twitter, and it is active as heck. And people's opinions about, is Ann Arbor part of this region or not? Do you have any quick thoughts?
Well, I retwittered it, so you could also go to me at SvenG and find that poll if you want to weigh in. So I grew up in Ann Arbor. I'm an Ann Arbor native. Lived there, went to college there. There was a time that I would have said, no, we're not really part of Metro Detroit. We're not a Detroit suburb. I still don't, I don't really consider Ann Arbor a suburb of Detroit. I think it's its own city, but I definitely think that economically it's all linked essentially. And I think culturally more and more nowadays too, the two cities are linked. I mean, look, you covered a few months ago the U of M's big announcement that they're going to redevelop the infamous fail jail site,
yes,
right?
Yes.
On Gratiot Avenue, right there at 375 on the edge of downtown Detroit, as a new U of M Innovation Center, which we don't really know exactly what that's going to look like. I mean, in terms of what they're doing there, but that's a big commitment by the University of Michigan into Detroit, which is where the University of Michigan launched way back in 1830 or whatever it was, long time ago. And look, Doug Song brings an interesting perspective to this too. He founded Duo Security back in 2009, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Sold a couple of years ago for $2.3 billion and change to Cisco Systems. Duo Security does like multi-factor authentication security stuff.
I mean, he's played the game and won. And I think he brought up some interesting points. He said that Detroit's comeback needs to be equitable and include the black middle class, and that his office is one of just a handful of buildings in downtown Detroit that is owned by African Americans, and that is something that I know we can say is true.
Duo Security has expanded at this point. I think they did a couple years ago to the Julian Madison building, which is where our friends at Bamboo Detroit, the co-working space, are located. That's the building that's owned by African American. It was designed by an African American architect. Doug Song also spoke a lot about his disappointment in the lack of investment in education and some of the proposals to take money actually out of education. He didn't really name them, but like some of the leading lawmakers in Lansing had proposed to actually take money out of education as one way to fund roads, as sort of a counter proposal to the governor's proposal to raise the gas tax. Which, I don't remember his exact words, but he said this is insane. This is a race. He described it as a race to the bottom.
I would also just add, Jared, I retweeted a guy named Eric Williams on Twitter. So shout out to Eric Williams. His bio said something about a social justice attorney, but Eric wrote, "I have no idea if there will be any follow through, but the conversations happening at Detroit Policy Conference are the right ones. Neighborhoods, minority business, community investment." I mean, we're hearing these themes come up again and again here at the conference, which I got to say is very refreshing. I think I agree with Mr. Williams here. These are the right topics for this city, but the key, as in anything conference related, is going to be follow through.
Speaking of the city, Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan took the stage, and a lot of the things, frankly, Sven, he talked about that would be pretty familiar to us. I mean, it kind of was a greatest hits thing, so I'm not going to rehash all of it, but there were a couple of things I wanted to pull out. First off, he said that he's campaigning hard for Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden. I mean, I think it's a pretty open secret that he loves Uncle Joe, and Uncle Joe loves him. It's a special kind of bromance.
Uncle Joe. Well, if Joe Biden wins the nomination, or much less the presidency, I definitely look forward to The Onion is going to become must read again, because they had a field day with Joe Biden back when he was vice president.
Well, I also wonder too if I don't know. I mean, I've only heard like rumors, and who knows what kind of. This is just wild speculation. But I wonder if that's the kind of thing where does Mike look at being part of an administration? And tying into that, he will announce later this year, not right now, if he's going to be running for mayor again. He went ahead and said that if he has the overwhelming support in the city he has today, that he will in fact do it. But I mean, that's interesting that this is just wild speculation, but it's interesting that he didn't say, yes, I'm running again.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, you would sense that, and we've talked about this, I think he's got the job as long as he wants it, and as long, frankly, as he can keep himself out of trouble. So far, I think he does have the, majority support in the city, which does indeed suggest that, maybe he's got designs on something bigger, like something like a job with a Biden administration, for example.
Well, and finally, Sven, I wanted to talk to you about this when we both saw David Coulter, the new Oakland County executive's presentation and speech.
Yeah, very interesting.
I wanted to talk to you about this for a bit because you actually covered Oakland County politics for a while. You are a veteran of the Oakland press.
Yep.
And I think he said some things that I never thought that I would hear out of an Oakland County executive.
Yeah, so just quick background. Coulter is the former mayor of Ferndale, and before that he was on the Oakland County Commission. So he's been around politics for a while. He was appointed in August to the Oakland County executive position, replacing the late, L. Brooks Patterson after Patterson died. Patterson had been in office. Patterson was a Republican, of course, outspoken politician. He had been running Oakland County since 1992. Coulter named in a controversial process. We've talked about that on a previous show. Because the Oakland County Commission has a slight Democratic majority now. Coulter has announced that he's going to run for a full 4-year term as county executive later this year. And that's going to be interesting as well because he's going to face off against Andy Meisner, a fellow Democrat who is the incumbent county treasurer and presumably normally a close ally of Coulter. I mean, I remember when Meisner was the state rep for Ferndale, so I know those guys know each other well.
And Meisner's been on our show before.
They'll face off in the Democratic primary, but that's a story for another day. For today's show, I mean, what was interesting is Coulter came out. It was almost like, I mean, I'm thinking of like, the old Western shows where like cowboy comes in, you hear him like stomping on the wooden deck outside of the saloon, right? And then the saloon doors open and he comes in and he's like, there's a new sheriff in town. I mean, I'm exaggerating. He wasn't coming out like that, guns blazing necessarily, but he really set a very different tone right from the get-go in announcing that that the barriers to regional collaboration were now gone. He didn't name, what that meant explicitly, but everybody knows what that means, right?
Right. Well, and I think there were some things that he did, like he's joined the Detroit Regional Partnership. That's a CEO group that his predecessor, L. Brooks Patterson, previously declined to join. In fact, I would say that Patterson was pretty triggered by its creation.
Oh my God, triggered.
And sent like this extremely loud and vociferous press release that just was like, saying that, Oakland County is getting usurped and all this other. It was just crazy.
And the whole purpose of the group, according to Patterson, was to benefit Detroit, the city of Detroit, steer all economic investment down there at the expense of everybody else. I mean, it was very like weirdly paranoid missive.
And so in contrast to that, Coulter said that it made no sense to have all of these redundant, duplicative economic development agencies working toward the same goal. And that leads to a point that he made about transit. One of the data points I thought was really interesting is that competitive regions, and he mentioned places like Indianapolis, Seattle, and the such, like other bigger regions, not within the state, they grew 17% in population. Meanwhile, he said that the Detroit urban area, which is the region, we had been looking at stats that would state about the same. He said that it's actually shrunk 6%.
Right. So like the urbanized core, in other words, while the entire Detroit region has more or less stayed level, everybody's moving out to like non-urban
26
suburbs and exurbs. Right, exactly. And he shared a lot of interesting data. Oakland County still, of course, humming along in terms of attracting investment. Although I think a lot of big kind of splashy projects have kind of started to come to Detroit as opposed to Oakland County. But $575 million in new business investment in 2019, 41% of which he said came from companies located outside of the U.S., which I thought was a really interesting point. But more importantly, back to your point about transit, that he shared lots of data showing the high numbers of people who both commute to jobs in Oakland County who don't live in Oakland County, so they're commuting from another county or another city, or people who live in Oakland County who leave the county to go to other jobs. And then he said, that of all the jobs that are located in Oakland County, I think something like a third of them are not even served by bus, essentially.
Which and when we say served, I mean, we both know from personal experience, served is a very loose term.
Right. I mean, in a lot of cases, that probably means like the bus will drop you off within a mile or two of your place of employment's front door, So he has been an outspoken advocate of increasing public transit, but it's going to be interesting to see with the new, discussions underway in Lansing, the new legislation that we've talked about, how much, his support for it is going to help. And then, looking forward to the election for the new executive, he's going to be the incumbent. This is essentially his first big presentation at a big event. All right, next up, here's my conversation with TV news reporter turned cannabis entrepreneur, Anqunette Sarfoh. Welcome to Daily Detroit. Good to see you on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you are quite active in the burgeoning cannabis industry here in Michigan. I think you got your start by opening a dispensary called Botanic. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you were in the news, a year or two ago after I think a truck
You had an incident with a truck trying to break into your business, right?
Right. It was a smash and grab opportunity, I guess. So yeah, we had a couple of people on New Year's Eve ram a truck into the back of our building, and they took off with not a lot of stuff, mostly our Mac computer, and it was more vandalism than burglary, we guess, because they tossed a lot of the products along the street.
But you're back open for business. You got past that hurdle, and everything's good as far as that goes?
Absolutely. We were able to open relatively quickly, and in fact, now Botanic is being sold to an out-of-state investment group. So in a few days, it'll be in someone else's hands.
Oh, interesting. So now you have kind of transitioned into a different role on the statewide cannabis board. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'm a member of the board of the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association, and we are a lobbying organization for the cannabis industry. It's a burgeoning industry, and so we want to make sure that the issues that we fought hard for when it came to legalization, now that legalization has taken effect, we want to make sure that patients are still taken care of and that business owners have the opportunity to grow their businesses as well as they can. So we are working with the state on making sure that the regulations work for not just patients but also business owners as well. So that's a delicate dance that we're trying. In the meantime, though, I also continue my advocacy work. I'm a big proponent of education. We have a lot of people who know that they want to try cannabis, but they don't know where to begin. And so I hold monthly tea parties, mostly for women, because women right now are the ones who seem to want to know more information in a different, a safer, calmer environment. They're a bit intimidated when they go into provisioning centers, and so we want to make sure that they go in with confidence that they deserve to have.
So you come at your position on the board from the perspective of a business owner who's been doing it for, 2-3 years now, I think, right? From that perspective, what sort of changes do you think are needed to help this industry, and especially now with the advent of legal recreational marijuana, really thrive and grow in this state?
We need more communities to opt in. Right now, the majority of Michigan communities have decided to ban cannabis businesses, and that's a huge problem because it drives up the real estate costs in communities that have opted in. We also need employers to jump on board and stop testing for cannabis for most positions. If people are allowed to take a sleeping pill or a glass of wine after work, they should be allowed to use cannabis in a responsible manner as well. So those are two of the main things that we're really pushing for. And also social use. People want the opportunity to enjoy cannabis in a social setting. This has been done successfully in Amsterdam. It's being tried in Los Angeles. We would love the opportunity to try something like that here in the Detroit area.
You're also African American. That's another big issue about the cannabis industry, is making it more inclusive. The city of Detroit has extended its kind of moratorium, I guess, on legal recreational dispensaries. And I think one of the things we heard from James Tate, if I'm not mistaken, was that we need to be careful because right now we've got a bunch of wealthy cannabis business owners from outside of the city who don't live here owning businesses in the city. So how can the state sort of encourage more inclusivity in the cannabis industry?
They're going to have a maybe uncomfortable conversation about zoning. Plain and simple. And also they need to come up with a way to make sure that businesses have access to capital. Those are the two main issues that are preventing more minority participation. You have severely restrictive zoning issues, and so people who may even own property are not allowed to use their properties for a cannabis business because it's not in the correct zone. And also when you look at the fact that we have no access to business capital. Some states are doing a state bank, for example, for the cannabis industry where they can access funds that the state provide, low access loans provided by the state. There needs to be some sort of creative legislating going on here, but you will not have minority participation to the levels that you could have minority participation until you address the need for capital and the need for real estate.
Are you working at all on the issue with Detroit leaders and trying to get them to finally come up with some regulations and everything to get businesses to open here in the city?
Well, the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association has always been open to have a dialogue with the city of Detroit. However, I have not been approached by the city of Detroit for my opinion. Granted, I'm sure that the people who are in charge of this have access to all sorts of information, and I also recognize that I'm an outsider. I don't live in Detroit. And so I'm one of those people who in the city is trying to address, because I am a person who lives outside of the community, and yet I was able to be a partner in a business inside the community. Granted, some of my partners do live in the city, but I'm not one of them.
On the state level, are you getting much, reception from lawmakers and people in power to some of the ideas that you're talking about and that the panel is promoting?
Yes and no. It's a delicate dance, but we're grateful that the state has always had an open avenue, and they would listen to our suggestions. But when the legislation is enacted, sometimes it goes our way and sometimes not so much. So I'm sure that the state is weighing a lot of different concerns and obligations, but sometimes we in the industry question why things are being done a certain way, and because they're being done the opposite of what we had suggested. But the state, we're sure they have their reasons, and maybe they're just not ready to share them with us just yet.
How much do you think the sort of halting efforts to get this industry launched and everything is down to like sort of the cultural stigma around cannabis? I mean, you're talking about something that's been, classified as a, narcotic for centuries in this country, and it's been demonized, and now suddenly it's legal. I think society seems to be sort of grappling with that and trying to like get their head around that. Is it going to be just a sense of like a matter of time and acceptance?
It's always a matter of time, because we are dealing with 80 years of propaganda, because up until 1937, cannabis was legal and every doctor carried it in his bag, his or her bag. And so now we're dealing with the reintroduction of facts, because once people try cannabis, they see that it's not this demonized substance that they were led to believe. And yes, some people may have adverse reactions, but we can handle that. But I tell a lot of people when they come and they ask me for advice, I have a lot of seniors who ask me for advice, and they don't want to get high. And you can use cannabis and not get high, and it can be very effective without getting high. And once people realize, oh my goodness, this isn't so bad, I was lied to, that's when change happens. So I'm not sure change will happen at the State House, but change is happening around kitchen tables. And hopefully they will take that impetus and take it to the ballot box and start supporting candidates that have a more open-minded approach to basically a more holistic way of life.
So you mentioned you're selling your medical marijuana dispensary, Botanic, which is in North Corktown over there. What's next for you, as a businesswoman?
Well, we have just been approved for a campus-style vertically integrated operation in Lenox Township. So very thankful for the people of Lenox Township.
Up in Macomb County.
Yes, in Macomb County, for giving us the opportunity to try once again. The sale of Botanic is bittersweet, but I'm a part of a larger group, and it was a unanimous decision to take this very generous offer from an out-of-state company. So I'm a little bit verklempt about it, but it'll be okay. We also have applications pending in Madison Heights and have some projects in the work in other municipalities around Southeast Michigan. So fingers crossed that those all work out, but again, it's all dependent upon cities opting in and accepting our applications. It's a very competitive bidding process.
Progress is happening, however slow.
Yes.
All right, Anqunette Sarfoh, thanks so much for coming on Daily Detroit.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate your time.
And we're done for today. Thanks so much for joining us at the Detroit Policy Conference. It's been quite a lot of fun, and good to catch up with folks. We have been shaking hands, talking to people in the hallways, old friends of the show, all kinds of stuff. It's actually been quite pleasant here.
We'll share all the conversations that we've had here today on this podcast in the coming weeks.
Also, of course, finally, thanks to our members at patreon.com/dailydetroit who help make this show possible. With that, I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.